Appreciate you coming on a cold night, and we're in for a great program. But first, I want to ask. Once in a while, someone has something for show and tell. So did anyone bring anything that you would like to share with the group? Picture, artifact, anything along that line? Okay, we'll take a pass on that. Tom, Berg, Sons of Confederate Veterans, give us a quick report for what's going on.
Howdy, y'all.
And talk loud.
I talk loud anyway. The 11th of January, of course, you know, we had the Dodge service, and I don't know if anybody's seen this on Channel 11 or not, but it was me and my guys.
Channel 11?
Channel 11. And turned out really good. We had a good showing there. We had a division meeting afterwards, which also went really good. February is going to be kind of slow for us, but I would like to make the announcement that the first time in the history, we do have some Confederate Veterans license plates issued by the state of Arkansas. So, you know, and the money from these license plates goes to preserve, like cleans up cemeteries and preserve the history of the Southern soldiers, the Arkansas Southern soldiers.
Okay.
So,
And I want to hitchhike on that a little bit because I get the battlefield update. I mean, that's what it's called. It's the summer. It's a not monthly or quarterly. It comes out the summary of all of the Civil War activities being sesquicentennial activities in the state. And Arkansas is leading on the number of. I'm afraid I'll say leading, but we're doing extremely well on battlefield preservation. And Jenkins Ferry and Reed's Bridge and Reed's Bridge at Jacksonville, Helena. And so these places, it's been very active in Arkansas. Very proud of it.
and Helena's got an ongoing thing down there. Matter of fact, it should double this year.
Okay, they are building a museum. Fill us in on what they're building. I should know that.
They've already built the fort, a replica of the fort. I think it's a third scale or so, or the actual fort. We purchased ground above it, and it's going to be a Sons of Confederate Veterans Park, and it's going to tell about what had happened there. Above that, they put Battery C, and they're trying to restore it to about normal conditions. They just put a 6-pound cannon up on top of it here within the last week, and they're fixing to tear down some apartment buildings, which is the actual end of where Dandridge McRae made his advancement in there. And of course, everybody knows who Dandridge McRae is.
That's our local account, Dandridge McRae.
He's our man from White County. Thank you.
Thank you. Arts Council. The Frederick Van Patten chapter of the DAR. Put you on the spot, Ms. Rebecca.
Yes, I'm forgetting I'm going to be called upon.
Well,
We've got 52 members now.
52 members.
And we're in the schools working with education and patriotism. And we started a new project, and anybody can help with this. It's a conservation recycle. If you have any prescription pill bottles that are empty, take the labels off or just give them to me that way. We're recycling those. They're being used on mission trips to Africa and Costa Rica and places. And so that's one of our projects. It's conservation.
Very worthwhile project, too.
Yeah. Just don't have to throw them away.
Great. Okay. So if you have interest in the Daughters of the American Revolution, the new chapter, Frederick Van Patten. When did you get your charter? In the last year, isn't it?
February, May of last year.
May of 2013. So you're less than a year old still. 52 members. Great, great, great. Ruth and Mary, Ruth Browning, Mary Norman, or Mary Hale. Norman's her husband. Sorry. Members of the Little Red River chapter of the DAR. So we have several DAR members present. Elizabeth, you've got a nice write-up coming in the newsletter on the Pioneer Village, but in case somebody didn't give us the newsletter, well, give us a little short update.
Well, Pioneer Village is alive and well despite the cold weather. No activities going on out there right now, but as far as the public is concerned, but we've had some repairs that we made and are making plans for more repairs before we
not the best time of year for Pioneer Village weather-wise. And unfortunately, the Christmas, I was going to say party, Christmas open house, the ice killed it. So those things are going to happen once in a while. But overall, we've had really fortunate weather for most activities out there. Are there any other organizations I haven't thought to call on that would have any interest? Yes, sir.
I've got a matter of interest. I believe it's on Thursday night at 8 p.m. The Travel Channel will be airing a piece on the USS Sultan, the troop ship or prisoner ship that blew up. That would be of interest, possibly to somebody to watch.
The largest loss of life, inland waterways, Sultana over at West Memphis, sank, and happened right at the same time that Lincoln was assassinated. So even at the time, it probably did not get the news it deserved. But it's been a very interesting archaeological dig, and Thursday night,
I believe it's Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central Time.
8 p.m. History Channel.
No, Travel Channel.
Travel Channel, okay. That I'm sure will be interesting. This is not far from, I don't know whether it's closer to West Memphis or Marion, but anyway, that East Arkansas area. So, visiting with us from Batesville, Miss Mary Miller, and appreciate your coming down in some rather cold weather. Miss Mary and a group worked in the past year to get the Walnut Grove Cemetery listed on the National Register. And Walnut Grove, one of the old communities in Independence County, and we're quite tickled to have you with us tonight. And hope the weather holds good as you go home. It should. And she's DAR too. Oh, okay. Well, again, thanks for being here. So, other announcements. Some of our board members are here and some aren't. Oh, Will Walker, stand up. I will not make you take a speech. But Will Walker is videographing or videotaping, I don't know what the correct term is, our meetings for us, Harding student, and we appreciate him very much. So thank you, Will, for being here. And eventually your mind goes, folks. I don't know what I was going to say next. I'll come to you, have to do it at the end. Our speaker tonight, we're quite tickled to have, and I am going to call on a former student of hers to introduce her. Where did the former student go? Here he is. DeWitt Yingling will introduce our speaker tonight.
Well, it's an honor for me to introduce Miss Browning. And back about 40 plus years ago, I had she was my teacher in world history. And I want to tell you, Miss Browning is a wonderful teacher. She is probably the best courses I had, and I've said that I had some great teachers, but Miss Browning was one of those. And I tell you, as a student at Harding Academy, I'm not sure that I always appreciated her interest, but as I got into college, I thought, you know, I wouldn't be able to do what I've been able to do in college, and really after college in life, if it hadn't been for Miss Browning and Miss Lynn, and some of the people who I used to think stayed up at night trying to figure out ways to make me miserable at school. But I think I kept them awake, unfortunately, probably too. But I had world history with Miss Browning, and it was a great class. I couldn't believe I went and took the CLIP test, which allows you to get credit for classes that you don't have to take. And my dad's here, so I was always conscious of the fact that I need to try to save money, on that tuition. So because of that class, I remember clipping out of art history, which she did such an all-encompassing class. It was unbelievable. And I had Ray Muncie, who I consider to be just excellent, but I put Miss Browning and Ray Muncie on the same level. I think they were really excellent historians. And you're being humble, but but anyway, I could finish that class and had a real grasp of all of Western civilization, art history, and things that I didn't even know that I knew. And left out of all these classes. In fact, those were probably the classes that I would have done well in, so my GPA probably went down because of that. But anyway, just a wonderful thing. Miss Browning always cared about us. And even, you know, we can talk about stuff and ability, but people who care about you, who look out for you, who want the best for you, those are the people who stay with you right here. And Miss Browning, I appreciate you so much. So excited to come and hear you tonight to talk about the women's role in the Civil War. So without any further ado, please help me welcome Ruth Browning.
Okay, now, like, so you can hear me all right? Okay. I was hoping Patsy Pipkin would be here. I don't see her. Oh, way over there. Okay, she came in after I was wandering around. I was just going to acknowledge that even though I grew up in Springfield, Missouri, that I have roots in this area. And the Pipkin, her husband, and I discovered that about, 3-4 generations back, we have the same ancestors, and so we consider ourselves related. And in the Browning family of Judsonia, again, about several generations back, we share a common ancestor. And there's a strong, an STRAWN line that my great whatever ended up in Clarendon in the early 1860s. And I think there's some Strongs down there that I've not been able to make contact with. So I consider myself sort of halfway a native of this area. I'm going to talk about the women in the Civil War. Women were not allowed to take part in battle or anything like that. So they disguised themselves as men to enlist. Why did they do this? They had lots of causes. Some of them wanted adventure. Some wanted to be able to leave home. Some wanted to help their country, whether it was the United States or the Confederacy. Some wanted to earn money. There was a pretty good sized bonus for enrolling in the regiment. Most of these women were young and poor and from farming families. Growing up on a farm, they were used to physical labor. In a few cases, a woman followed her husband or brother into battle. Women are documented as serving as scouts, spies, prison guards, cooks, nurses, and actually engaging in combat. How could they escape being recognized as women? First, we need to understand that many of the enlisted men were young, and their voices hadn't changed, and their faces were smooth. Women bound their breasts, wore layered, loose clothing, cut their hair short, and kept to themselves. Also, physical exams were not as rigorous as they are today. If you had teeth in your head and could hold a musket, you were fine. Loretta Valescu masqueraded as a Confederate soldier. She wore a false mustache, developed a masculine walk, learned to smoke cigars, and padded her uniform coat to make herself appear more muscular. Also, men were modest by today's standards. Soldiers slept in their clothes, bathed in their underwear, and went as long as 6 weeks without changing their underclothes. Many refused to use the odorous and disgusting long open trench latrines of camp. So the women soldiers would not call undue attention to themselves if she acted modestly, went into the woods to answer the call of nature and attend to other personal matters, or left camp before dawn to bathe privately in a nearby stream. Occasionally a soldier was discovered to be female, but she was usually just sent home. Sometimes the women would be in prison for a short time. The situations where they were found out were often medical: injury, dysentery, chronic diarrhea. And the nurse, the doctor who discovered the secret, kept it quiet. At least 5 soldiers were discovered as female when they gave birth. If the female soldier's secret was discovered by her fellow soldiers, they seemed to have accepted and kept quiet. If the military discovered this deception, they discharged the lady and she was sent home. When the women were found out, fellow soldiers wrote home about them and told of their exploits, often not giving names. So stories romanticizing their adventures and praising their patriotism appeared in the New York Times, the Richmond Examiner, and the Chicago Daily Tribune. Several women penned popular memoirs. Some of these memoirs are probably a little bit exaggerated. It is true that the military service of women did not affect the outcome of the campaigns. Their service did not change the course of the war. Compared to the number of men who fought, the women are statistically irrelevant. But the women are significant because they were there, and they were not supposed to be. The actions of Civil War soldier women flew in the face of the mid-19th century society's characterization of women as frail, subordinate, passive, and not interested in public affairs. Many of the women served without ever being identified by name. One anonymous woman wearing the uniform of a Confederate private was found dead on the Gettysburg battlefield on July 17, 1863, by a burial detail from the Union Corps. Based on the location of the body, it is likely she was a Southern woman who died participating in Pickett's charge. In 1934, a grave site was found on the outskirts of Shiloh National Military Park and revealed the bones of 9 Union soldiers, and one of these skeletons was with a mini ball beside the remains was female. One of the best documented female soldiers is Sarah Edmonds. Her alias was Frank Thompson. She enlisted in the 2nd Michigan Infantry in Detroit in 1861. Her duties while in the Union Army included regimental nurse and mail and dispatch carrier. Her regiment fought in several battles, but in 1863 she deserted because she got malaria and feared that hospitalization would reveal her gender. In 1867, Sarah married and had 3 children. In 1886, she received a government pension based on her military service. A letter from the Secretary of War in 1886 acknowledged her as, quote, female soldier who served as a private, rendering faithful service in the ranks, end of quote. She died in 1898 in Texas. Sarah Rosetta Wakeman wrote to her family, quote, I'm as independent as a hog on ice. I will dress as I am a mind to, for all anyone else cares, and if they don't let me alone, they will be sorry for it. Wakeman's letters were not published until 1994 and are the only known collection of letters by a Civil War woman soldier. Her family found the letters in an attic trunk. Rosetta was born in 1843 in Chicago County, New York, and was the eldest of 9 children. She left home in 1862 disguised as a man and began working as a boatman doing manual labor on a coal barge in the Shenango Canal. Shortly after making her first trip, she encountered recruiters from the 153rd New York Infantry Regiment. The offer of a $152 bounty was too good to refuse, and on August 30, 1862, Rosetta enlisted in the name of Lyons Wakeman. The regiment left for Washington, D.C. on October 17. The description on her enlistment papers stated that she was 5 feet tall, fair-skinned, with blue eyes. Her regiment was assigned guard duty in Alexandria, Virginia, and later in Washington, D.C. to protect the nation's capital. The first letter Wakeman sent home contained information about why she left home and what she was doing. She often sent money home. She used her birth name when signing her letters, which would have ended her military career if they had been intercepted. She was happy to be financially independent and was proud to be a good soldier. In 1864, her regiment was transferred to an active battlefield at Pleasant Hill, Louisiana. Her regiment probably numbered about 11,000 soldiers. Her last letter home came from the Fort landing on the Red River. Her regiment had been forced to march hundreds of miles through swampy bayou country with poor food and drinking water. In the letter she wrote, quote, our army made an advance up the river to Pleasant Hill about 40 miles. There we had a fight. The first day of the fight, our army got whipped, and we had to retreat back about 10 miles. The next day, the fight was renewed, and the fighting took place about 8 o'clock in the morning. There was heavy canoeing all day and sharp firing of infantry. I was not in the first day fight, but the next day I had to face the enemy bullets with my regiment. There was 3 wounded in my company and 1 killed. I feel thankful to God that he spared my life. And I pray to him that he will lead me safe through the field of battle and that I may return safe home, end of quote. The Red River Campaign claimed several lives, including Wakeman's. She contracted chronic diarrhea, which eventually killed her on June 19, 1864, in the Marine USA General Hospital in New Orleans. Thousands of Union soldiers died from the same cause, by drinking water contaminated by rotting animals. She is buried under the name Lyons Wakeman in the Chalmette National Cemetery near New Orleans. No record exists which tells whether her true sex was ever discovered. Jeannie Hodgers, an Irish immigrant, was born in 1843 and probably arrived in New York about 1859, disguised as Albert D.J. Cashier. Hodgers, barely 5'3", lived as a man before the war to get a fair factory wage. She spent 3 years in the 95th Illinois Infantry as Private Albert D.J. Cashier. She was unable to read or write, so marked an X on her enlistment papers. After a month of basic training, her company was sent to Kentucky, where they joined the Army of the Tennessee under Ulysses S. Grant. Jeannie held her own in the 40-some battles her regiment fought. During the 3 years she served, her identity as a woman was never discovered. She earned a reputation for bravery under fire and was selected for some of the most dangerous tasks, which she performed with skill and daring. During the siege of Vicksburg, she was captured by the Confederates but managed to escape by grabbing a guard's rifle and knocking him senseless. She served until 1865, when the regiment was mustered out of the Federal Army. After the war, Cashier worked as a laborer and lived as a man for the next 45 years. She lived in a small house she had bought. Every year on Decoration Day, she donned her uniform and marched in the local parade. And every year she did what no woman could do in those times. She voted. She eventually drew a pension and finally went to live in Quincy, Illinois, then the soldiers' home. In 1911, she was hit by a car, and the doctors treating her discovered her sex. She asked that they keep her identity secret, and they did. As she grew older, her mind deteriorated, and she was committed to the insane asylum. The attendants there discovered she was female when they gave her a bath, and she was forced to wear a dress, which she pinned to make into pants. She died there in 1915. A public disclosure of the fact that she was actually a female set off a number of sensationalized newspaper stories, and also revealed that none of her fellow soldiers had ever suspected her of being a woman. Women on both sides were often involved in spying. Women, especially those of greater social standing, were able to befriend high-ranking officials and their wives and gather information. Also, as many of them owned boarding houses, they could easily eavesdrop on the conversations of soldiers staying in their homes, write down information, and pass it along. Men would often talk freely about intelligence operations in front of women because they felt women could not understand military conversations. Rose Greenhow, a prominent Washington socialite and Southern sympathizer, used her connections to gather and pass ciphered messages and reports on Union battle plans to Confederate officials. She is credited with helping the South win the Battle of Manassas, also called First Battle of Bull Run. Eventually, Greenhow was found out, was arrested, and she served time in prison. But even from prison, she gathered information and sent out messages, which she hid in the fancy hair buns she styled for her lady visitors. After her release, Confederate President Jefferson Davis sent her on a diplomatic mission to Europe. While she was returning to America in 1864, her ship ran aground off North Carolina, and she drowned, weighed down by the gold that she was carrying on her body. One of the most celebrated heroines in American history is African-American Harriet Tubman, who is best known for ushering slaves to freedom through the Underground Railroad in the 1850s. But Tubman, who had escaped slavery in 1849, also set up a vast spy ring for the Union during the Civil War. In early 1862, Tubman traveled to South Carolina, where she served as a nurse and a teacher for the hundreds of newly liberated slaves who had gathered in Union camps. She soon recruited black men to go behind Confederate lines, posing as servants or slaves in order to gather military information. She also organized dangerous missions in which Union troops destroyed plantations and took former slaves away on warships. In June 1863, Tubman herself led an armed expedition along the Combahee River, liberating more than 700 slaves. Later, she was denied a pension for her spy work. Isabelle Bell Lloyd, born in Martinsburg, Virginia, became one of the South's most notorious spies. In July 1861, a drunk Union soldier invaded her house, according to her own account, tore down a Confederate flag, and spoke offensively to her mother. Enraged, 17-year-old Bell shot and killed him. Acquitted of the crime but closely watched by Union troops, she beguiled her enemies into revealing military secrets, which she then sent on to Confederate commanders. In May 1862, Bell was staying in Fort Royal, Virginia, with relatives whose hotel had been taken over by Union officers. She eavesdropped on a meeting of these Union officers by listening through a hole in the door and rode through enemy's lines, reportedly dodging bullets along the way, to report to Confederate General Stonewall Jackson. She was imprisoned in July 1862 in Washington, D.C., but released a month later. In May 1864, Bell sailed for England to serve as a Confederate courier, but her ship was intercepted by a Union vessel. One of the naval officers named Samuel Hardinge was placed on board as prize master, but he fell in love with Bell and helped her escape to London, where they married. He died shortly thereafter, but Bell, now a widow and a mother at 20, remained in England to write her memoirs and launch a successful stage career. She later returned to America and continued acting, married twice more, and lectured on her wartime experiences across the nation. She died on a speaking tour in Wisconsin in 1900. Virginia, Jeannie, and Charlotte Lottie Moon, daughters of Dr. Robert Moon, were born in Virginia, but the family moved to Oxford, Ohio when they were young. The Moon House is an historic site in Oxford, Ohio today. These sisters spied for the Confederates during the Civil War. While growing up in Oxford, Lottie had scores of beaux. She really wanted to marry James Clark, an older lawyer whom she met, but finally agreed to marry Lieutenant Ambrose Burnside, a man closer to her age. The date for the wedding was set as June 21st, 1848. On that day, before all those assembled for the wedding, the preacher asked Ambrose if he would take Lottie to be his wife, and Ambrose answered yes. Then the preacher turned to Lottie with the same question: will you take Ambrose as your husband? Lottie looked up at the tall lieutenant standing beside her and answered, no, sirree, Bob, I won't. There at the altar, she changed her mind. She really wanted James Clark, whom she married the next year. Younger sister Jeannie came to live with the Clarks at James Station in 1860s. The Clarks were pro-Southern. By this time, James was Judge Clark and was active in the Confederate underground organization called the Knights of the Golden Circle. It was not unusual for couriers to visit the Clarks while carrying secret messages. One time, a caller arrived with messages for Confederate General Edmund Kirby Smith in Kentucky. Lottie volunteered to carry the dispatches and so began her career as a spy. She disguised herself as an old Irish woman and headed for Lexington, Kentucky by boat. There she was able to hand off the papers to General Smith. She returned to Oxford by train. This mission was so successful that she began carrying more messages and dispatches for the South. Canadian Confederate sympathizers heard of Lottie's work and invited her to Toronto. With forged papers identifying her as a British subject, Lottie, in 1862, attended a meeting of Espionage agents in Toronto. She then headed for Washington, D.C., where she presented herself to the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, as an English noblewoman who had come to the United States to take the warm baths at White Sulphur Springs, Virginia. She wondered how she could do this. How could she get relief from her crippling arthritis if she couldn't reach the warm springs? Stanton was totally fooled by Lottie and made arrangements for her to ride in President Lincoln's carriage as he and Stanton were going the next day to inspect the troops on the front lines. Stanton also gave her a note to give her safe passage through the lines. As the carriage with the President and the Secretary of War rumbled through the hills of northern Virginia, Lottie appeared to fall asleep. In this way, she was able to learn much confidential information as the two men talked about the war. When they arrived at the front lines, Lottie was able to use her note for safe passage and delivered the information she had heard to Jefferson Davis himself. When Lincoln and Stanton realized that Lottie was the source for the information which had allowed the Confederate troops to defeat the Northern forces in several battles, Stanton put a price of $10,000 on her head, dead or alive. In April of 1863, Lottie made her way to Cincinnati, hoping to cross the Ohio River into Kentucky disguised as an Irish scrubwoman. She said she was headed for Lexington to visit her son, who had been injured in combat. The young private wouldn't let her through, so she asked to see the general. The private took her took her to the general, and lo and behold, he was Ambrose Burnside. When Lottie saw him, she became frustrated and she lost her Irish dialect. He recognized her and placed her under house arrest. He could have had her shot or hung, but some spark of attraction for her still existed. Lottie lived out the war then in Cincinnati. Now to her sister Jeannie's career as a spy. She had gone to Memphis to be with their mother, who had gone there after the death of Dr. Moon. Jeannie and her mother helped wrap bandages and nursed wounded soldiers. As the Yankees got closer to Memphis, Jeannie began making trips back and forth with information and supplies, often passing boldly through Union lines, pretending to be going to meet a beau. While in Jackson, Mississippi, Jeannie learned of an urgent message which had to be gotten to the Knights of the Golden Circle in Ohio. She and her mother volunteered to make the trip because they felt that they wouldn't be suspects since they had relatives in Ohio. The North now knew that women were being used as spies by the South, but Jeannie and her mother made the journey to Ohio without incident and gathered the necessary papers and supplies. By this time, they were under suspicion. As they prepared to return to Memphis by boat, a Yankee captain came into their cabin to search them. Jeannie pulled out a small Colt revolver and screamed at the officer that she was a friend of General Burnside. The officer backed away and left her alone long enough for her to swallow the most important dispatches she carried. Then Jeannie and her mother were taken to an office and a housekeeper searched them. Jeannie was reported to be carrying 40 bottles of morphine, 7 pounds of opium, and a quantity of camphor. These were used for medicinal purposes for the Confederates. They were immediately put under house arrest in a hotel. No action was ever taken against Jeannie and her mother, and the charges were dropped. They were eventually ordered to leave the Union area and return to Memphis. After the war, Lottie and her husband, Jim Clark, moved to New York, where she became a journalist for the New York Times. She died in 1895. After the war, Jeannie moved around the country, ending up in Hollywood, where she had her bit parts in 2 movies in the 1920s. From there, she went east to New York, where she held court in Greenwich Village until her death at the age of 81. One of the most famous female Civil War spies was Kate Warney, who is believed to be the first female detective in this country. She was a slender, brown-haired woman who walked into the Pinkerton Detective Agency in 1856, looking for a job, according to Allen Pinkerton, owner of the detective agency. Born in New York, she had been left as a young childless widow in search of work. She answered an ad for detectives in the newspaper, and Pinkerton hired her to work in his agency. Although it was not usual to hire women detectives, Kate argued that a woman could be most useful in finding out secrets in many places where it would be impossible for a male detective to do. She could befriend the wives and girlfriends of suspected criminals and gain their confidence. Also, men would often talk freely about intelligence operations in front of women because they felt women could not comprehend military conversation. So, on August 23, 1856, Pinkerton hired her. Kate was successful in helping solve several cases before the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1861, but she is most famous for her part in preventing his assassination before he was inaugurated. The following is the way Pinkerton learned of a possible assassination plot against President-elect Lincoln, which would take place as he was traveling to his inauguration. Pinkerton's team of 5 agents included Kate. They were sent to Baltimore, Maryland on February the 3rd, 1861, to investigate the secessionist activity in that area. I need to point out, because a lot of you don't know this, that back at that time, the inauguration occurred in March, not like it does today in January. During the investigation, evidence revealed a plot to assassinate Lincoln. The secessionists believed that Lincoln would be coming through Baltimore on his way to take office. Their purpose was to see that, although he entered the city by rail, he left the city in a casket. Kate disguised herself as a rich Southern lady visiting Baltimore. She faked a thick Southern accent and infiltrated secessionist social gatherings as a flirting Southern belle. She was quick not only to verify that there was a plot to assassinate Lincoln, but also to find out the details of how this was going to occur. Lincoln was traveling from his home in Springfield, Illinois to the capital by train tour that was to stop at important cities along the way. His published schedule showed that the last leg of his journey was from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania to Washington, D.C. All southbound trains were required to have a transfer in Baltimore. The northbound station ended at Calvert Street, and the southbound started at Camden Street. The distance between these two stations was about a mile by carriage. The secessionists plotted to kill Lincoln as he passed through the narrow vestibule of the depot at Calvert Street station to enter his carriage. A fight was to break out so that the few policemen at the depot would have to rush out, leaving Lincoln entirely unprotected at the mercy of the mob of secessionists who would entirely surround him at that time. After Lincoln was killed, the plotters would escape by small boat. After determining the validity of the information, Pinkerton asked Kate on the morning of February 18 to take the 5:10 evening train to New York City, where she met with a Lincoln supporter and supplied all the details of the Baltimore plot. Lincoln was made aware of the plot, and although he was doubtful of it, agreed to the plan of escape. He made the train trip as planned until it reached Harrisburg. There he left the dinner party to change into a traveling suit and a soft felt hat, and carrying a shawl on one arm, he took the role of an invalid. He went to the train station where he met Kate and the others, and playing the part of Kate's invalid brother, he made his way through Baltimore without recognition and arrived at Washington by sleeping car. He arrived safely and was inaugurated as president. Because Kate did not sleep a wink during this overnight trip as she watched over Lincoln, Pinkerton came up with the slogan, "We never sleep," which he later applied to his agency. As a Pinkerton agent, Kate was a master of disguise, switching from Union soldier to Southern debutante to harmless grandmother. This allowed her to find out many secrets that she passed on to Pinkerton, who in turn passed them on to the proper authorities. After Fort Sumter was fired on, Major General George B. McClellan asked Pinkerton to set up military intelligence service for his command. Kate was placed in Virginia and Tennessee to pose as a Southern belle, familiarizing herself with ladies of the South who spoke freely about their husbands and boyfriends' regiments. She also hung out in camp towns to pick up vital information about where the Army Corps were stationed, who the commanders were, where fortifications existed, and what the strength of the artillery was. Kate died on January 28, 1868, at age 38, after catching pneumonia on New Year's Day. Pinkerton was at her side. She is buried in the Pinkerton family plot in Chicago, Illinois, Graceland Cemetery. So as you can see, there are other women who served as soldiers, as spies, and other capacities in the Civil War. And these people merit recognition in modern American society because they were trailblazers. Today, women's service in the military is socially accepted. In those days, it was not. The women soldiers and spies of the Civil War had to disguise themselves in order to serve either the North or the South, and we salute them.
I'd say we still have a school teacher in our midst who is very organized, knows her material, and Ruth, you're hard to beat. I'm glad I'm not competing against you. So,
Well, it was interesting.
it's a very interesting topic, and one that we just don't really, an unknown part of our history, which is always.
They just brought me
I read it 3 times, but women were not even paid attention to because they were considered unable to understand military conversation strategy. So therefore, they were able to do the spies and things like that.
Could just be anywhere because they didn't know. Or did they, at least the people thought they didn't know. So, thank you so much. I forgot to make a couple of announcements that I want to. One, Norman Hale, Ruth's brother-in-law and Mary's husband, is in intensive care, and he is usually at meetings. So we miss him tonight, and certainly pray for the best. Ask people to remember Norman in your prayers, and Mary, the family. Mary Beth Wilburn, our former president, has had surgery and is up and about, but has had an infection, and I don't know, Mary Beth just seems like cannot catch a break the last few months, so remember her, please. One thing we're going to ask for in the newsletters for the last year, we have been listing community events, and we talked in board meeting tonight about that, and would like to continue it, but we need input. And so if you know of a family reunion, a church reunion, a community reunion, a festival going on in any of the towns, please get that information to us. Some of it we're getting, some we're not, but it's something we think is continues to be worth pursuing because I think particularly family reunions are not as common as they used to be, but there's a lot of history in one if if it's there. Georgia helped us last year helped advertise the romance reunion, so as an example. The other thing I meant to do a while ago was introduce officers. I didn't even introduce myself. I think most of you know me. I'm Bill Leach. I will be the president this year. Sam Holloway is our vice president, and Sam, raise your hand, Sam. We won't make you stand up. He's way in the back in a white cap. DeWitt Yingling parked right in the middle and did our introduction. So DeWitt, you don't even have to raise your hand since you've been seated. Cheryl Shaver is over in the corner raising her hand next to her husband Robert. And Elizabeth Hurd gave us a report on Pioneer Village a while ago. Wave your hand, Elizabeth, in case somebody forgot who you are. And Ruth Browning, of course, gave our program tonight. And Scott Akridge has turned into a mountain man on us, but he's up here at the front. I like to pick on Scott. And Georgia Rogers is our treasurer, and Georgia's in, what color is that, Georgia? Hot pink. Okay, she's in hot pink. But she is our treasurer, and if you would like to join the society, White County Historical Society, the dues are $20, monthly newsletter, and our heritage is out. If you are a member and have not received a copy of the heritage, please let us know. The program next month, Dr. Ruth Couch, who can you help me with her title? She's retired from ASU-BB, but I don't know.
Vice Chancellor of Academics.
Vice Chancellor of Academics at BB, BB Junior College, with their now AS. Who are they now?
Arkansas State University, BB.
Arkansas State University, BB. Thank you. Anyway, she has worked on the history with a group of Antioch School. I know Ms. Jones knows Antioch. Ms. Jones, wave your hand, Peter, and anybody else from Antioch community that happens to be here tonight. Probably that part of the county is not often too well represented, but we'll have a neat program on Antioch School, and I'm sure we'll get to the community. Probably Dr. Couch will not get a program, but we'll have a group do it. But it should be a very interesting program. Antioch's an old community and has always had a lot of pride. Did anyone else think of anything else that should be shared with the group? Ruth? January newsletter is late. There's been several problems, the last of which is the post office changed the rules on staples, and that has not helped us any. But it probably, Sam, it was mailed last Friday, I believe. Has anyone received their newsletter in the mail yet? Okay, several have, so it is out. Which reminds me of one more thing. If you're a member of the society and would like to receive your newsletter by email, please let Cheryl, we'll pick on you, let Cheryl know if you'd like to receive your newsletter by email, please. And anything else we think of? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Tom.
I forgot to say a while ago, but my camp has adopted Old Dogwood Cemetery. We're gonna be out there, we're gonna clean it up, straighten the headstones up, and see if we can fix some of the ones that's broken.
Okay, very neat. Old Dogwood probably has the highest percentage of Confederate veterans buried in it. It's in the very southern part of the county. We're in a rural area. You walk, is the Fletcher Ellis Road paved now or is it gravel? Have you been?
50-50.
50-50. If you want to know, if you want to go to Old Dogwood, contact Tom because it's not on a main road. But it is a very historic cemetery, and that's a great program that y'all have, that you've adopted the Old Dogwood. So, our door prize tonight, need to ask who in the world, Dewey, pick a number between,
I'm gonna pick my number.
well, we have more than 28 people here, with only 28 signed in. If you didn't sign in, you're gonna have to miss out on, I forgot to grab the cookbook.
You better get somebody else, I know my number.
You know your number? Ms. Miller, did you pay attention to your number?
No,
Good, give me a number between 1 and 28.
26.
26. Well, my glasses off, and it's Amanda Toppich. And Amanda folds our newsletters for us. So Amanda, you're gonna have to start cooking, girl.
Bill, there've been some good pictures lately on the White County as I Remember It Facebook page.
Okay, White County as I Remember It Facebook page. Some good pictures. Okay, worth checking out then, very much so. No other announcements? Ruth, again, we thank you, and we are dismissed. And you come next month.